Now, right?
I'm hanging out, yeah.
Okay, so let's hang out. Maybe you'll see some shit with my mix and you know, be like, bro, you need to check yourself.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna share my screen. So you guys should hopefully hear this. Hearing a kick drum? Yeah, that's right. Okay. So this is the new John. I'm just gonna play a little bit of it. It's basically it's in 3 parts. So I'll just play some of the first part, some of the second part, and some of the third part, and we can go and I'm happy to show you guys anything you want. Let me just minimize these so you can see the overall composition. I'm actually impressed with myself because the colors make sense on this file. Normally,
yeah. I mean, that's like before you get into it.
Yeah.
Color coding is. I never did it for a long time, and it is so helpful.
Yeah.
Like my drums are always one color, my synths are always one color, and like the buses correspond to those colors. So like if I'm ever like, where's the drum bus? It's the same color as all the drums. And like the drums, like I try to keep in the same order with the same color code, so I always know where the kick is. And like that kind of stuff seems so insignificant and can be annoying to set up, but especially when you're doing sessions with a bunch of channels, it's a fucking lifesaver. I would highly recommend, like, just pick whatever color makes sense to you to match with one thing, and always make that color huge.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, my system generally, like, I don't use any templates. I start from a blank Ableton every time. It's more of just for shits and giggles than like anything I think is right or wrong.
Yeah.
It also leads to like a wild inconsistency in a lot of my records. But whatever. Yeah, I mean, I usually use like blue tones for bass, B for bass.
Yeah.
And, like, just basic stuff like that. So let me play you guys some of this. So in the intro, this is the intro. The 303 doesn't modulate. It just goes ba-da-da, 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 ba. And then there's this FM synth that I can explain. So that's the middle part, and then like the kind of crescendo starts about here. kind of breaks down. So this is actually really good too. If you guys have questions about like just Clay, I'm not trying to steal your shine, but if you want to talk about, if we're going to talk about my work for a while, if you have questions about like just why I compose, because like I don't know, like people either kind of love or hate the way I compose my tracks. I'm willing to. I love answering questions about that because there's a whole rationale for why they do what they do, and I could totally explain it, and I love to talk about it. So there is a story there. So if you have questions, there are answers. So I'll break this down. So what I have at the very top is this track here, and it's just called Ghost. That's what I call the Ghost kick drum. That's what's controlling the side chain, not the actual kick drum that you listen to. This track is muted. And so this is just a pulse that ticks the side chain that I have on the main bus that kind of glues everything together. What's cool about doing it this way is like you can get kind of crazy and creative with this. So like let's say you're having a track that's like a steady kick drum, like a 4/4, just like bump, 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 bump. You can send it like an electro pattern, like and then side chain your track with an electro pattern so that there's like a really subtle perceptual squeezing that's rhythmic, that's not the same as the overall rhythm of your track. And that can either sound really fucked up and messy, or it can sound really cool. It depends on the track. And then I have just a basic kick drum. It's just here. I love the Ableton drum strings. Like I use them all the time, especially for the lone flanger and echo stuff. Like this is a super simple. The root pitch is at 43.3 hertz, so that's not even necessarily something that you're going to hear, but it is something that you're going to feel in the party space. I put a little drive, pull the envelope back a little bit, and I usually do like decay at like 1/3 up, because that's just something I did on the 909, and that's just where I like decay. I don't like a lot of like I'm not a big fan of like super boomy long decay kick drums, even for electro shit. I just like my kicks kind of short and tight. And then above that there is a bass line made out of kick drums, and it sounds like this. And what I like about these Ableton drum synths is it tells you the note value of your pitch. So the main kick is basically an F, and then the bass line is just 2 notes, because I mean, I'm of the school where bass lines longer than 3 that's like hair metal shit for me. That's like way over the top. I can't handle it. So it's just an A sharp and a C sharp. 2 notes that I use a lot. But it creates like a kind of cool, like little poppy groove. And it begins to harmonize with the 303 line and the FM, like, you know, trippy sound. Let's see, there's a snare that starts out, it starts out on the 3 and then switches to the 2 and 4. So it goes from this. So it's more, basically it's a dub pattern, and it switches to like a more backbeat electro pattern. This is just how we make the sausage in Loveland Land. But again, there's 2 snares. So this is basically the lower snare, and then I use a breakbeat sample for the higher snare. I'll explain that in a second. And then, so this is cool. So this is just the sine wave. This is just the operator FM synth. And as you can see, I've drawn the envelope so that it slowly fades in, fades out, goes silent, and then comes back in all at once for the crescendo of the song. And this is cool. This is a cool trick I recently figured out, and also like the ambient record I just did is all tricks with the Ableton operator FM synth. So I'll show you how I made this sound, because this is like it's a pretty effective trippy sound. So you guys can hear me, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So it's just it's two oscillators on the FM synth. There's one is a fucked up sine wave. Well, they're both fucked up sine waves. So what I do is I take a Max for Live LFO module, which if you guys haven't downloaded these, if you have Live 10 and you have not downloaded the Max for Live creative extensions, I strongly recommend you rectify this, because the LFO is the most useful shit I've come across in Ableton in this entire version.
It's kind of insane that they didn't have that.
Kind of insane they didn't have it
before.
earlier. It's like kind of a fuck up they didn't have it earlier.
Yeah.
And they only really got it after Bitwig started doing.
Yeah.
So what I do is I take the LFO and I tell it to modulate the fine tuning of only one of the LFOs. So basically what that does is that takes the FM, the frequency modulation, and slows it way down, so it's super noticeable. I'll turn off this other stuff because it'll be clearer how the sausage is made here. So this is just the synth and the LFO. It's really like tinny and weird sounding. And then I put a super short delay on it, which makes it ring. And then I, you know, because I'm a crazy dude sometimes, I put a flanger on the whole thing. And so what this does is between those things, each one of them has their own like LFOs. It basically makes so that this is one single sound that just evolves for the entire track, and you don't have to worry about it. You don't have to draw a bunch of envelopes. You don't have to do a bunch of tedious shit. And you get a really effective, really powerfully trippy sound. And then I just put a bunch of convolution reverb on it. And then, so these are the red is 303. So I'll show you all the different parts. So this is what y'all came for. So the main line is just this. So as you can hear, it's really attacky and poppy. That's just something my 303 does. It sounds almost like 808 toms sometimes. Like, look at these. Like, that's crazy. And then, so for reference, this acid line is only one note. It's just F sharp, which is the root note of my kick drum. So that basically what I'm doing is I'm making sure that all my pitches are more or less harmonic. Otherwise, when you start to use like, because I'm using like a sub bass line from kick drums, and I'm using a 303 pattern. If you don't do this, maybe not you, but I will lose track of all of the harmonic relationships of the track, and you'll get a lot of like dissonant bass that like sometimes isn't even noticeable until it's loud, and then it just sounds off. When the bass harmonizes, it sounds just tighter and fuller, that's why you don't want dissonance in your bass. Dissonance and everything else is fine generally, I think, but bass is you want to be kind of like dumb, you know, and kind of like don't pull any tricks on the bass line. Just go with like something simple. So then the next 303 line, this is a modulated, I'll show you what I got on here. This is more of like the high effects track. So this one is kind of cool. It's as you can see, I've got it EQ'd. Well, let's go back to the main one. So the EQ curve is pretty basic, but it's cut below like 50 hertz. So that just cuts out all of the super low sub bass from the 303 that allows the sub bass coming from the kick drum bass line to come through. And then I like to spike it around 100 because that's kind of the thump frequency. And then around 1000, that's kind of the squelch, squeak frequency. And then its sibling over here is the same thing, same EQ curve. I put an auto pattern on it, auto panner on it, so that it kind of flies around your head a little bit. And then this is one of the only plugins that I use that's not a Waves plugin. This is the Sound Toys Effects Rack. This was on super sale. It was actually free during the COVID lockdown. And like any good drug dealers, they gave it away for free. And then at the end of the lockdown, they were like, yeah, now you got to pay for it. And everyone fucking bought it, just like they were selling heroin. But it's a super useful set of tools. And so what I have is a filter, a pitch shifter, a phaser, and a multi-tap delay. It's just a lot of shit that makes it sound really full and spatial. And then there's this final, this is like the kind of like super duper special effects track. You're like, what the fuck? But I'll show you how to make shit like this. So it's just a lot of that is coming from the effects rack, but I've showed some of you guys this trick in the past. But so if you go into the sample menu in Ableton, and if you go down here, this is kind of like a critical Loveland tip. So and if you go down to where it's in the sample box here, you go to Beats mode, which is how it defaults. You can adjust the way that Ableton cuts the clip up when it time stretches it. No one knows that Ableton does this. You can totally use this tool to chop up audio into arbitrary lengths. And so what I did is, like, if I didn't do this, it would sound something like this. Which is also, by the way, just this acid line taken into another track, pitched up. As you can see, it's pitched up an entire octave. And if I don't manipulate the formants or the transients, it just sounds pitched up. And it's kind of like what Brendan told me. It's like, it's kind of weird, but it's not really that weird, so you got to make it weirder. So check this out. So if you go into Beats mode, and it says preserve, it defaults to transients and sounds like this. Well, no, actually, the default is this. It sounds a little warbly and fucked up. So it's like, that's a clue that we're getting somewhere. But if you change this where it says preserve, you can change it to like 16th notes. It starts to sound like this. It sounds more time stretched. Then what you can also do is you can go down here to where there are these back and forth arrows. Take this, and basically what this does is this tells Ableton how to fill the gaps between the sounds. If it's back and forth, what it will do is it will play the sample and then reverse it to fit the gap. Because what you're doing, imagine a slinky. When Ableton is stretching the audio, it's like the slinky, like the space between the coils grows out, and Ableton needs to fill that void with something. So what it does, it's clever. It'll just play the sound, the slice of the sound backwards, and most of the time it makes it sound okay. but you can change this. It's an option. So if you go to the double forward arrows, what that does is it plays it back at 2 different speeds and sounds like this. It's starting to get cool. But what about that last option, the single forward arrow? That means it doesn't try to fill the gap. Sounds like this. Yeah, that's kind of cool. So what you also get down here is where it says 100. That's actually a decay envelope. Again, this is not like Ableton made any attempt to tell people that Ableton can do this. It's just like, they just present it as this thing that you're supposed to know what to do with it. And so no one ever fucks with it. But you can change it to, let's say, 0. And you get this really poppy little slice of audio. Again, it's like a slinky. So like, what if we did 16th notes? What if we did 8th notes? What if we changed this to 50? So I get a ton of mileage. Like if you've ever heard like the drums on like my Echo records and shit like that, they're all like staccato and like ripped up and time stretched. It's all just from messing with this. You can do it with drums, synths, whatever. It's like the coolest thing Ableton does, in my opinion, and it's one of the reasons why I continue to use Ableton, even though I have Bitwig. Bitwig's algorithm is basically too sophisticated, where it doesn't sound shitty sometimes. I need shit that sounds shitty sometimes. And so what I do a lot of times was I'll take a 303 line, pitch it up an entire octave, and then chop it into 8th notes, and then add delay to that. And then you get a real like wild sounding thing. You know, and it's kind of a lot of mayhem, but like if you take a track like that and kind of bury it in the mix, it adds a lot. Again, like Clay was talking about, you know, space and atmosphere. It goes a long way because, again, if the 303 sound also modulates because I'm turning the knobs, the little clips are going to change over time and it's going to sound really alive. And then down here, there's just a couple, I added some like drum breaks and stuff like that because I was feeling kind of like mixing it up. And I have, remind me, actually, I'll do it right now. So there is, you know, I don't know if you guys have heard of the Internet Archive, but it's this profile, it's basically, it's what it says. It's an archive of the internet. And someone found all of these sample CDs from the 90s that came with like Future Music Magazine, archived them all, ripped them, and uploaded all of them online. So it's basically like this unbelievable cache of crazy samples from the 90s. Everything from like every drum and bass break you'd ever want to like tablas, mellotrons, anime sound effects. I'm gonna see if I can find it real quick and I'll put it in the chat. While Google fucking boots up, I'll play you these drum tracks. So like this is like almost a silly sounding break. It's just high pass aggressively. And then there's this one. Oh, tricky. Oh, one's the high pass one has all the reverb, and then the low pass one has less reverb. Tricky. And then there's this. This is a sample from another one of my tracks, which is something I do a lot, is just sample my other tracks of just a snare drum. So when everything kind of comes together, and then when everything comes together, I threw in a disco loop, because why not? You know it's a drum break. This one, hold on. that's the, it actually sounds like this. It's like a famous old like jump and bass break. Anyway, I think I consolidated it, so it's not quite on point. But then, what did shit, where did I have that loop? Actually, that probably sounds better. And then I throw a beat repeat on it, which is like a super cheesy effect, but I use the shit out of it subtly to just add a little bit of like high passed variation. You hear it, it kind of makes it purr. And then when you smash it, oh, and there's some 909 hats that I got from my buddy Pablo. He makes really nice hats. Oh, and one other thing I wanted to say about the bass line is there's a couple tricks. For instance, here. So the original 303 has two waves, two basic waves. It has a pulse and a sawtooth. I prefer the pulse wave because I think it sounds a little classier and more sophisticated. The sawtooth wave is the rough kind of like 303 sound that I don't, let's say, respond to as much. But what I did here is I start the first 2/3 of the track has the pulse wave, so it sounds like round and kind of bouncy. And then what I did is as I was recording, I just flicked the wave to sawtooth for the last part. So it sounds like rougher. That's the kind of sound that if you add distortion to it, it's god awful. But like if you have some saturation on it, it's dope. And it's kind of like a way, again, like with these old machines, it's a way to get more sound out of it. It's like getting two sounds for the price of one. And so, yeah, anyone have any questions? I'm happy to do whatever. Sam, did I answer your questions about this track?
Unmute people.
Oh, hold on. Yeah. So, yeah, anyone? You got me. Ask away. Sammy? I can't hear you again, Mo.
I have a question.
Yeah, what's up?
So like, okay, so acid techno. So like, I get like it's that kind of sound, but like, I'm still not getting like what brings in the acid to the techno.
Oh, that's a good question, right? That's like a really good question. Maybe Clay's got some shit to say about that. But like fundamentally, and this is something that is different. Like if you're British, for instance, you have a different understanding of what acid is from maybe most Americans, especially people my generation. For me, I can only tell you, like, there's no right or wrong answer. It's kind of, it's like rock and roll. Like, what the fuck is rock and roll? But like I can give you my interpretation or my version of the story. So the acid sound is the sound that this synthesizer makes. Oh, hold on. It's all right. So this is an old original. You can't really see it. There we go. This is an old original Roland TB-303 bassline synthesizer. This was a synthesizer that was made for guitarists to have someone to play along with for bass. So it's like if I'm like trying to record a demo, you have a drum machine that's going like boop boop bop boop 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 bop, and then you have this thing that's a bass line machine that goes like ball 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 ball. Yeah, it just kind of bubbles along, and then I'm supposed to jam and sing over it. Basically, it was a market failure. They were super expensive to produce. They cost a bunch of money. There's all kinds of legends and shit about this. Like apparently the circuits were designed by this young Japanese woman. Crazy mythology about this. But it has a very unique sound. And what happened was these machines, this is like the abridged version of the story. But these machines ended up in like pawn shops and secondhand stores and thrift stores all over the place. So in the mid 80s in Chicago, house music was taking off. And basically my interpretation of what those guys were doing, this comes from a reading of like Jesse Saunders and Jamie Principle, was that they were basically broke guys from the inner city of, you know, depressed neighborhoods trying to make disco records without bands. And so they just kind of got whatever they could get their hands on that made sound and started kind of thinking that it's disco. Basically what they wound up doing is inventing house music, because drum machines, these bassline synthesizers, things like that were all available like really cheap. The other thing is like when you buy a synthesizer from a pawn shop, you just get the synthesizer itself. You know, it doesn't come with the box or the manual. So a lot of this was like these dudes figuring out, and ladies, there are plenty of women involved in the beginning of house. Like I shouldn't just say it's dudes. But like these people were, many of them were non-musicians, many of them were just DJs, people that had kind of like an ear for the groove, but like couldn't really play any instruments, certainly not any normal instruments. And so they acquired these machines and acquired them without manuals, without batteries, without a lot of the components that would help you understand how to use them. So and then the famous story is that DJ Pierre or Spanky, one of those guys, or was it Sleazy D was the first one? Sleazy D was the first one to get the 303, right?
I'm not sure.
It's all like all these guys are like old now and they're just like, no, I invented it. No, I invented it. No, I invented it. But so it's hard to get the straight story out of these guys. But anyway, one of these guys got one of these bassline synthesizers and figured out how to make it make sound. But the innovation and what makes it acid is that they figured out that it's really cool if you play the synthesizer and turn the knobs at the same time. So if you modulate the synthesizer while it's playing, that's like a whole other thing, because when Roland invented the machine, you were supposed to dial in a specific bass sound and then just leave it. So they already broke the rules from like day one. And they're saying, no, actually, it's better if you turn the knobs as it plays, and it creates this kind of evolving like wah 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 sound that according to some legends, people thought it sounded like acid rock or it sounded psychedelic. So that's kind of how it got the name acid. That's like yeah, Clay, take it away.
They were also putting acid in the punch at parties.
That's also true. That's also true. There was a lot of LSD consumed when all of this happened.
The only thing that I would add is like, yeah, I think like, although over time it hasn't been so strictly the case, like the 303 has a very weird filter, like, and I'm not like a major electronics person in terms of like components, but the 303 filter slope is in between most normal filter slopes. So that really resonant spiking of the filter and sweeping the filter is what created a lot of that really like squelchy sound that defined the early acid records. And in a big part, I think that sound came from the fact that they used really strange components. Or I mean,
well, no, you're absolutely right. Like, I had a long conversation with Mark Verbos of Verbos Electronics, also techno legend, about why the fuck it sounds so weird. And this is what he told me, was that because they were intended for the consumer market, they use consumer, not musical grade components. And all of the each of the major components of the 303, also the 606, maybe like the 808 even, like all of the major components have like a plus or minus 25% voltage tolerance, so that at any moment the voltage is either going up or down random. And that's what makes it sound alive. For me, this is like the whole fact that the synthesizer sounds alive is like spiritual for me. Like it's for me, the 303, like the bow sound is like the sound of creation. It's the sound of life. It's like that. If life had a sound, it would be the acid sound for me. You know, I'm not saying this is true, but I just think it sounds so alive and just that makes me crazy. You know.
Yeah.
It's because of just basically a lot of the design was kind of like half-assed and stuff like that. Let's see. But then, sorry, Mo, oh yeah, did you have more questions?
No. I was just saying, like, I think it will take time for me to get used to it. Like, I'm still.
Oh no, like I said.
For the acid techno itself, I'm still
like
trying
said,
to understand it.
It's a feeling. I can give you some like foundational tunes that really helped me get my head into it. I'll send you a playlist.
Okay.
It's also like, it's a really strange thing, like kind of like what you said, like what is rock and roll? And like there's probably a lot of people who could give a more detailed history of it, but it's just, I think ultimately a terminology based around that sound of that filter squelch on the 303 that like laid the foundation for it. And then there were a lot of other tracks that fell under the acid umbrella.
Yes.
That maybe were not so specific as the initial tracks.
Yeah.
But
I mean, for me, I think a lot of people, especially here in Europe, associate any kind of bouncy, relatively simple, highly resonant, square wave bass synthesizer sound as an acid sound.
Yeah.
That's maybe that. For me, that's too broad. That's like saying anything with a guitar, a bass, and drums is rock and roll or blues or whatever. It's close, you know, but like not quite there. Yeah, I mean, again, this is just my interpretation.
Thank you.
Yeah. And then there was a question, Mo, you had a question about the arrangement. So I'll show you, but like basically the arrangement of the drums is super dumb, because I found that like I like to especially for like more long form acid tunes, if there's too much drums, like it becomes about the drums, when I want all of this to be about the acid line and the trippiness and that. And so you know, I like to title my tracks aspirationally. So I called this, when I just opened up Ableton, I've called this "Let Me Hypnotize You." And so everything was then in service of making it really like groovy and hypnotic. So the drums almost do nothing. They just keep time. But I can show you, there are a couple tricks though. Couple tricks. All right. Yeah, I'm still sharing my screen, right? Okay. So I'm gonna mute the all the acid parts. Come on, Ableton. Come on, babe. You can do it. You can delete that track. Man, this computer has had it. All right, well, while Ableton thinks, I can, oh, there we go. All right, so this is mostly what we're dealing with is just something like this. It's just like bump, 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 bump. But it's just basically what it is it's a disco bass line. It's like from a Chic song. Bump, 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 but everybody dance. Woo. I mean, I'm influenced endlessly by disco, so like I don't have any problem with that. And then there's a snare for the beginning. The snare is on the 3, so it's like a dubby, like you know, getting some Caribbean influence. And then there's just a sine wave that's wailing away. But I'll take that out. If you can see how dumb it is, there's just a little delay. I'm a big fan of not syncing delays. I think, you know, Clay can talk about this too. I know we've talked about this because I think there's an overemphasis and a fear of things being out of time or off the grid among a lot of people. Whereas for me, when shit is off the grid, that's the moment it becomes interesting. And I think you would probably echo that up to some extent, Clay. Like the grid is good for what grids do. Overall structure, right? Overall structure. But the microstructure doesn't have to be on the grid. And so this delay that's on the snare is just like it's just the Ableton delay, but it's 120 milliseconds. It's just, I just dialed it in by ear by listening to what I thought sounded best for the track. And it's the same delay that's on the kick. And you know, so a slight amount of delay on the kick is a good thing sometimes. That like I have some tracks that I put way too much delay on the kick and it's just mayhem. But just like a nice little like kind of builds tension and gives it a little funkiness. And then in the middle, the bass line, I add a note so it gets more intense. Instead of bump, 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 it's bump, 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 bump. It's an academic thing, but there is a slight difference. And then now the snare is on the 2 and the 4. It's a proper traditional backbeat. And then finally, when it gets to the kind of crescendo sequence, that's when all of the other drum breaks and loops and stuff like that I threw in just come in. If I can put it on. So there's this one. That is that's like basically, I didn't chop it. I just took the loop and just looped the whole thing, 1 bar, just like mega dumb. This is from this 90s sample CD. Oh yeah, that I was gonna find for you guys. On. Have you seen this, Clay? Do you know about these?
I don't know, what is it?
It's the sample cache of all these 90s samples from like Future Music Magazine.
Maybe.
Dude, it's endless. It's endless.
I have a bunch of like hard copy CDs that I found a while ago of stuff like that. I'm not sure if it's the same stuff or what, but I also have some stuff like that I downloaded.
But it's like it's the sample, like the Jungle Warfare sample CDs that are like the ones that like every unremarkable drum and bass record from the entire 90s.
Right, yeah.
Bass. So it's like tons of great breaks.
Yeah.
There it is in the chat. You guys go nuts. Like it's samples forever. And I've been using the shit out of them. Some of them you're gonna totally recognize, like a lot of the vocal samples, like oh yeah, like it's on like every house record, like that's on there, and you know like all the like sexy girl voices and stuff like that are on there. Like it's like everything, and like the robot voice, everything. Anyway, so there's it kind of electro-y. Sounds like it's from a boogie record. And then there's a 909 open hats that are top. And then this is the drum break with like bongos. And that's like I associate that pattern with like G-Man, with like the shit that Richie Hawtin used to play in the early 90s or like late 90s, early 2000s, like the G-Flame records. You know what I'm talking about, right, Clay?
Yeah,
like,
I mean, it also reminds me of some of the Mills records.
Yeah, like shit.
And even stuff like User or
User.
Yeah.
And then as you can hear, the drum loop seems like it's all chopped up, but that's just because I use the beat repeat thing. Just kind of add a little subtle variation, because when everything's together, it doesn't sound like it's like glitched out. It just sounds like someone's kind of, makes it feel kind of human. Oh, I think there's one other secret kind of buried in here that I am happy to share with you guys. No. Yes. Okay. So there's a groove on the break, and there's a couple grooves on a couple of the breaks that make them kind of like subtly funky. If you guys haven't used the groove features of Ableton, I'm sorry, but they're awesome. Yeah. And again, like if you think of that trick that I showed you that's about like the slinky and like chopping the slinky up and like stretching the slinky out and arbitrarily granularizing these loops, basically what Ableton can do is it can, when you do that, it will take those individual chunks of sound and shift them slightly in and out of the grid, like according to a shuffle pattern or something like that. And it's like the bomb. And Ableton comes with a bunch of built-in grooves. You can make your own. That's kind of like its own little sub course on how to do that, because it's not as easy as it sounds. It's actually kind of hard. But like I made my own for a 909 that sounds really good. But like I'll show you what it sounds like. So this is with the groove, and this is without it. I know you're saying I don't even hear it, but like, oh, it's a little like, that's my interpretation. But like, I'll show you, I'll crank up the funkiness factor. You can hear it, right? It's subtle, but it's there. And so I have that, and that's on the main break, and up on these guys. It sounds kind of stiff. So if I don't put the groove on it, it sounds kind of stiff and it sounds like a loop. But if I put the groove on it, and I'll turn off the beat repeat so you can actually hear it. When you put the groove on it, it gives it a more human feel. That's with the groove. my favorite groove that comes with Ableton is called Hip Hop Number 4. It's just a great groove. I think it's based on the SP1200 swing, but it works on everything and it looks great for techno. And then, but the thing is so much, you know, who am I to talk about the groove? But I worked really hard at this and I know a thing or two about it. But it's very much a matter of like feeling, and almost it's like a kind of psychoacoustics of rhythm. So like it's whether or not you can use your imagination to anticipate the rhythm or not, and like what is expected, what is unexpected. That's kind of, for me, it's like the dance that a lot of like good groovy tracks play, because you know that like, okay, the snare drum's supposed to be there, so I'm gonna dance, I'm gonna move like this, but like it's gonna come in late and it's gonna make me kind of do another dance move. Like it's just, it forces you to use your imagination a little more when you're dancing. That's what I like about grooving this. And then when you add up the groove across like a little groove here, a little groove there, a little groove there, if you add them all together, it turns into perhaps the funk. So the overall result is a pretty bumpin' like classic late 90s like user G-Flame techno. You know, it's like every track on Houghton's Dex Effects in 909 has this. And then you bring in like a front 242 sample and you're fucking done. So that's the drums. Was that helpful? Sick. I'm exhausted. I gotta go to bed. It's like 2:30 here. But this was amazing. You guys, thanks for sticking it out. Clay, you're a champ. We're gonna have you back. I think we're gonna make this a thing because I think there's interest in these kind of discussions, and I really want this to be like a safe space for like what you might think is a dumb question. But again, we're talking about gleaning knowledge here.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, maybe you think it's dumb, but like Clay thinks it's brilliant or whatever. Like these kind of just like, I like to think of this. I mean, everything I know that I learned as a creative person, I learned when I was in design school, in art school. And I'm doing this the way we did it in art school, where it's just like, we're going to pin up, we're going to talk, we're going to have a discussion, and, you know, we're all going to learn. It's going to be maybe aimless, maybe boring, but hopefully insightful and inspiring. So that's what I got. You guys are the best. Love from Berlin. Clay, thank you again.
Yeah, thank you.
Good night, everyone. I'm going to just turn this thing off. And then we'll put the video up on Twitch if you want to watch any parts again. So I'll let everyone know.
Yep.
Okay? All right. Blessings.
Later.